Here on the Creative Thinker podcast, we discuss all theories, philosophy, and thought behind the creative process. And we hope that you find some inspiration along the way. Ahoy, creative thinkers all across the globe, and welcome to the Creative Thinker podcast. I'm your host, Henry Moon, and I'm joined by
Michael Vasquez.
Hey, crowd favorite, as always. Thank you for getting together. For anybody who is viewing, and I'm sure listening, we're both feeling a little under the weather, and we're doing a little bit of a different format here over webcam. So forgive the differences in production. Thank you for your patience in that. Today we have a special treat for you. We're talking about repurposing your world, repurposing other people's world, and creating something out of someone else's work. So we all are familiar with the idea of plagiarizing, and we're all familiar with not wanting to do that. So we want to take somebody else's work respectfully, and we want to make sure that basically taking it down to bare bones and creating something fresh out of it. There's nothing new under the sun, as we all know, as people who are trying to create something fresh and new and create new combinations and fun characters and gripping art. So we want to take somebody else's work guilt-free and sort of strip it down and take it and make it into our own piece of art and make our own beauty out of it. So Michael, I know as a player in your world of Dungeons and Dragons that you've spent umpteen hours, I mean, just thousands of hours at this point creating this world. And it's so rich and so beautiful. And we'll be talking later this month about sort of making your world rich and your terrain rich. And it feels like there's always something going on in the world you've created, which is so cool. But a lot of that, maybe that's overstating. Some of that at least is taken from other works of art like Halo, like maybe Gears of War feels like it. I'm not quite sure on that one. And Star Wars and, just like different art forms that you experience, and you repurposed almost everything. Like if it's recognizable visually, it won't be recognizable when it starts talking, or at least will keep the essence of what it is, and then you'll make something new out of it. So you're very good at repurposing things. Could you maybe walk me through a few examples and then tell me, like, how do you do it?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest example that I can think of is Tartarus, right? So if you've played Halo 2, you know that Tartarus is a main character in this Halo game, one of the main villains. I wouldn't say like the main one, but someone that you're constantly clashing with throughout the entire series of the game. And I really liked kind of that aesthetic of like these brutes who are like coming in and changing the guard. And I really liked their kind of like primal instinct, but also like they had smarts as well. So tag that with, I'm also a big like Halo Star Wars nerd. So I'm reading a lot of the books as well. And reading about the history of the brutes or the Johane, that was very interesting to me because they have like this kind of like tribal system as far as like who's going to be a leader and how do you kind of overthrow someone, who is the chieftain of this clan. And now that they're in the covenant, what are the different clans that are around the space, and what is Tartarus's rank when it compares to everything. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And as far as like repurposing for your world, I know a lot of that lore. I know a lot of that history, or I knew a lot of it. And then I'm going to change it to my world and make it work for me. So now when I introduce Tartarus to our world, I'm hoping that it strikes a little bit of fear in like you, right, Henry, because you've played the games, and as far as worked. Like, right. And as far as like the other players, sometimes like I'll throw hints just as a storytelling thing. Like one person will catch a name and then they'll be like, oh snap, and that kind of like tension you can feel at the table. So I dropped that name and then I just repurposed him for my world and what I needed. I liked that character and this kind of enforcer like responsibility that he had, or this enforcer like presence that he had. I liked his like not giving a crap attitude and just getting the job done however he could. So I really like that. I was like, this is going to fit the role for this person and this faction. And we've talked about him before in our factions episode. How that was like the top leader in the city that y'all were in. So I was able to repurpose him, and then more recently, you're able to learn a little bit more about their lore, and like what his actual purpose was. And so it's interesting to like kind of throw all that this main character from a Halo game and then completely change him and give him a lot more depth than, I'm sure you didn't feel as connected to Tartarus in Halo 2, whereas like Tartarus in our game was like this whole arc of like, fighting. This was like the biggest gang versus gang fight. There was heavy hands being thrown. I think this was like the first real deadly encounter where I believe your character ended up going down. And
many times.
Yeah. And then it went down. And then essentially like y'all were the rest of the gangs were fighting over the bodies so that y'all could resurrect them, as far as like, the magic setting, you can bring people back to life, but you needed the bodies. And so they were literally fighting for bodies in this battle. It was crazy. But that all came from just repurposing this guy and then trying to make it cool and unique. And then most recently, as far as repurposing, you guys found out.
Before you move on, there's something I wanted to drop about Tartarus that is like about the game. Tartarus and the entire Drillhane feel like to me a cross between the Flood and the alien race I can't remember the name of. You remember what they're called? The guys with the mandibles.
The Sangheili.
Sangheili. Right. So they were a cross between the two. It's like they're sort of smart, but also not really, but they're really intense because it's almost like these animals that as soon as they see you, they're coming after you and they're going to keep coming until you're dead. Right. And there's that like brute mentality of I'm just going to keep punching until I'm done. And that I would never think to come up with a character of that race, because that to me is like he's so single-minded. He's so like it's almost like they're great first line soldiers, but they're not great characters.
Yeah, in the game they were very much like bullet sponges. I don't know if you've like people have heard that term. It's just like you waste a whole like clip or two if you're not headshotting. And it just
2
like
or 3 guns.
Yeah, and they're charging at you. Like there was always this presence of like feeling like you were closed in. I remember some levels I was just like, oh my gosh, like everywhere I move, there's just more of them coming, and it's just I don't have enough ammo.
Some of that level design, I mean, this is an aside, but some of that level design was so perfect because there's corners everywhere and you just can't get out. And it's like a lot of the bins move, and once they move, you're just stuck in there. You have one way out and you're toast, right? It's such a cool level design. But anyway, you took things that were maybe like, I wouldn't say boring. I love the Halo games, but we're more boring elements of a bullet sponge race that's probably there for more of a game element than it is for a story element.
Right.
Okay. And so you took that and you said, okay, why? I'm assuming you said, why are they so single-minded? Why do they charge after somebody without stopping? And then you added these characteristics of like honor and dedication and this sort of like warrior mindset and all of these like main character traits. That's what they call them, but at least what I've heard them called. And so you've made a really likable and really rich character out of him. And so it was by the end, I remember the last fight, I was like, I know, because in D&D you play your character and sometimes that's at odds of what you want to do.
Right.
And so I remember in the last fight, it was like Vangerlin, who's my character, and Tartarus had this moment of like, we understand each other right before they started fighting. And I was like, damn, I got to kill this guy. Like, I really enjoy this character. It'd be cool to keep him around. But it's like, because of the party, because of all the forces at work, and because of my character, like I gotta fight this guy.
And he had that same kind of sense of like, all right, like you've bested me twice, and this I have been disowned, dishonored, and I like, hey, props to you. You did a great job. and now like this is my final chance to, try and kill you back. Like this is my honor. If I don't get it back, then I might as well be dead. So yeah, he had that same feeling towards you.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that works really good for you is that you've always had a really good idea of structure. And
Mhm.
so, you're like, this is his place in the organization, which means XYZ. This is it's like you have a very clear thought process that I'm
Mhm.
envious of to some degree.
Yeah.
But also, like, it's just very clear. And I feel like when you take characters from other stories, it comes through that filter of your mind, which is, okay, here are the main five pieces, maybe. And then here's how, now that he's in my world, here's what I need him to be.
Mhm.
Um, so you had a second example that you were going to
Um,
use.
Yeah, so I mean, there's also like a ton of little examples, right? Before we kind of get to like the big one that I was gonna say, is like locations, right? So especially depending on what you're creating your world for, like if you're going to just do like your own short story, like this is your hobby, take names from other places, right? There's how many repurposing of like the Disney characters are there, like the Disney princesses and the Once Upon a Time kind of change on, what we all grew up as the fairy tales. And then I know my wife is reading a book that's like even more of like the fairy tales, but there's a different twist on it, right? um and so you're able to reuse like names, locations, and still make them your own. So when I first started making my campaign, at the time, Molly Ann, my wife, had not read Lord of the Rings, and she had only watched maybe one of the movies at the time. And this was before I was prepping the world before you started playing, and I wasn't sure how much Lord of the Rings that you knew. And some of my towns and cities like had Lord of the Rings name. Like I had a Helm's Deep in my world. There was nothing like Helm's Deep, right? But how can you use Helm's Deep in a world and not have like the connotation of everything that Helm's Deep is in Lord of the Rings?
And
So
you
that I
renamed it
did
to
have to change.
Harvest, right?
Well, yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Harvest was that was actually a Star Wars planet that I turned into a city. I'm sorry, a Halo planet that I turned into a city. But there are still other names that I took from other works of art. I mean, Fine Star's finest. Fine Star, I believe, was taken from Aragon. And um, there are a couple different locations from Aragon that I took. There are still some names from Lord of the Rings. There's still some names from Halo, some names from Star Wars. That there are so many planet names. I just picked and choose which ones I wanted. I was like, this sounds like it might be a good city name, and then from there create the city that I wanted to create. So you're still able to repurpose those names in your works of art and still make them your own thing. And then more recently, I think I was telling you, Henry, that the gods and titans in my world have now become very up to the forefront in my planning and prepping. And I don't necessarily like my lore doesn't match with like Forgotten Realms or D&D lore, so I've had to change what lore that they had to make it fit mine. Um and so like you can take full lore pieces from other works of art and other people's creations and still change it to your own thing, still respecting that their creation and still making it your own unique version of that. And I think when you do that, you're able to create and have a lot more passion into what you created, and you'll be able to bring that passion. I think we talk about it so many times, is bringing that passion to your storytelling, to your work of art, and then you're going to be able to bring those people around to the passion of whatever that repurposing that you're bringing for it. And then lastly, the big repurpose, the big kind of surprise, I guess, for my players recently is we're playing D&D, but they figured out that they are on one of the Halos from Halo, and it is a full ring, and it's been this whole kind of big conspiracy to make everyone believe it's a planet, and then they can see the other realms, and just the way that I made it work in my world, that these rings still kind of function the same as the Halo rings, but they have a different purpose, and everything about like planar travel still exists, and then here's the reason how. And this is, you can see the realm that you wanted to go to through a series of Dyson spheres that are unaffected by the rings, and then you can see the other rings. Like everything is actually all close together currently because of the timeline that I created, which I could go way more in depth in, but I think that goes off the topic of what we're talking about for repurposing.
I think it's also cool that your campaign has so many different elements. It's like it started off very fantasy, and then it started to slowly include, through our Halloween episodes, this like spiritual element, this sinister beyond the veil kind of element, and then we've started incorporating sci-fi into things slowly too. And it's like it's just because it's over time, I'm guessing, and also because of all the effort you put in, it seems so effortless as a player. The additions and transitions, and it's so cool. But I think where this leaves us is the question: how do you repurpose something to make it respectful? And for me, if you're going to reuse something that someone else made, and especially if you're going to do whole cloth, in terms of like names or like locations, but I'm going to, instead of making it Tatooine, it's going to be some other name, but it's going to be a desert planet, and everything's going to look kind of similar, if you're going to do it to that degree. First of all, I think it should be said that it's not a big deal to use someone else's work. I think that's almost the expectation. And it's also a flattery if it's something that you do all the time. It's like, yeah, hey, they took that from my story because it works so good, and obviously you're going to like your own story more than you like theirs. I mean, there's a point where, if I made a Star Wars story, they're going to sue the heck out of me. Right. But, there's a point there, but it's like, if I'm going to structure my story exactly like one of their books, same thing. Right. But if I'm taking elements and elements of things that work and putting it into my story, like even writing songs with your wife, for our band, is like, we start off with like 5 songs in mind or something like that it's like, this is what we want it to sound like. And then we take elements from each song and we make something new, because we're much like folkier band than most of the songs we're listening to. So obviously it's going to be new regardless, and new words and things like that. But it's like, it sort of has the feel of those songs, and that's okay. So I think that's like the first thing that you need to get out of your mind, is like copying people or using other people's work is a bad thing. When it becomes a bad thing is when you're taking complete ownership of something that you didn't change at all.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
for sure.
That's when it becomes a problem. But to me, there's how many did I write down? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 questions that I think are important if you're repurposing someone else's work, and that's what works about the story, or character element that you're trying to use. It's like each one of these questions provides you a checkpoint, so to speak, to take someone else's work and filter it through and change it in some way. So like asking what works for me is going to be different than what works for you. So if we talked about the Halo game, pardon me, then I wouldn't grab the Drillhane as a character, because that wasn't one that stood out to me, but you did. And so immediately right there, just because we're in the same world doesn't mean we're going to arrive at the same conclusion. So what works about the story. And then the opposite is always my favorite to go to next, which is what doesn't work. So that I've been doing a lot more audio design lately. And if you don't reverse out certain frequencies, or like just lower the volume on certain frequencies, they're going to be there. And so that's sort of what this question does, is if I don't like something, like I don't like the little popcorn guys in the flood, if we're talking about Halo, I don't like those. That feels like if you give them the actual abilities they have in the game in a story, it's almost like world breaking immediately, because they move so fast. And so to me, that doesn't work if I'm going to retool that world. And then it's like, of what works, what can you retool is my next question. Number 3. I'm just sort of blitzing through these and then I'll give you a chance to respond here. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, you're good.
And then let's see what after, what works and what can you retool, which I think is important. And retooling just means like, if it's a highly recognizable character like Darth Vader or something, then I'm not going to have my character walk in dressed like Darth Vader. Like, I'm going to change the way he looks. I'm going to change his backstory. I'm going to change, the way he talks. I'm going to change so much about him. But even if he did the exact same actions at that point when he looks different, I mean, you got to change some stuff, some pacing, some whatever. But I mean, like, if he did 80% of this exact same thing, but he changed the way he looked, spoke, and where he came from, people would never know that that's who he was. So, I mean, if you can change 40% of what a character is, say, then that's, if you're diligent about it, that's usually enough. I mean, even if it's just changing names of those things, it like does not have to be a big restructure or retooling. And then I just talked about this, but this is the question version of that, which is, what is the character or elements pacing, backstory, and vibe? So like, if you wanted to bring in like what you did with the Drohane, right? Like, he's got a certain vibe and you kept that vibe. And you kept like the visual component, and then you changed everything about who they are and then put them into your world. And then you added, added the world and his place in it, and started rebuilding him back up after you stripped him down to the structure. And I thought that was really cool. And then this is my last one. I know questions like this get tiresome, so I apologize, but
no, you're good.
Do you need their presence? And work back from that is what I have for my last one, which is to say, if I am craving in my story the Darth Vader character, do I need their presence more than I need Darth Vader? Right. So I like this one a lot because I watch a lot of TV, probably more than I should. And I see characters that I'm like, I really enjoy that character. And then I want to add them to my story. And I say, well, do I want to add this character to my story, or do I want to add someone with that presence to my story? Do I want to add somebody that is at that station to my story? Do I need like a god character? Do I need an admiral? Do I need, whoever it is, do I need them in a structural way more than I need them in an aesthetics and, in the context of the story kind of way? If that makes sense. So those are the things that I ask myself the most when I'm retooling a story. What do you think about that? Do you find those useful? Is that anywhere close to the process that you have?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's 100% where you go with it. And you kind of like, when you think about when you're trying to be creative, and we're talking about maybe writing, film, a little bit more right now, D&D, what works about the story and what doesn't work. That is 100% when you go to the movies and then you watch a movie and then you get out with your friends and you're just like, dude, that part was so awesome. I love that part. This part was kind of meh, right? And you're taking that kind of like, enthusiasm and your likes and dislikes, and then you're bringing it into your story, right? That's exactly how I did with Halo. That's what I've done with Star Wars. When we talked about the D&D movie, spoilers for the D&D movie if you haven't seen it, the new one, there's a character there that all of y'all were like, this 100% is Marazul, right? The lawful paladin. And they're like, this is, y'all all individually said, oh, that's Marazul, right? Like, that stereotype and that presence was there. While it wasn't the exact same character, that presence was still in our game. And so, when you're repurposing, you could look at the D&D movie and repurpose a lot of that because it is D&D, but you're able to also go to like the stories that you like, because whatever you're drawn to that you like, you're going to bring into your story. You're going to bring into your art. That's why I did so much repurposing of Halo, is because I probably spent way too much time playing Halo. I think it's like hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of hours playing Halo over the course of all the Halos. And that's what, over the course of 20 something years now.
Uh-huh.
So, that's why I leaned into that. That's why I bring so much video game elements to our story, or to my story and to my writing, is because that's what I spent the most time on. And then I was able to be like, well, I wasn't satisfied with that ending, or, how can I change it? I did like how they brought this. I like how, stories don't always end with like, um, a conclusion. Sometimes there's some stuff that needs to be left to the imagination. I like that about stories. I found that that's something more recently I like. Whether that's a good writing tool or not, who knows? But as a DM and a game master, you have to get used to like your stuff not being fully explored. But as far as like repurposing, yeah, dude, that is what works, and what doesn't work, that is 100% that movie theater, getting out of the movie kind of attitude. That was the first thing I thought about. And then, of what works, what can you retool? I mean, what you think is cool. Yeah, be really what it comes down to, like, what, and by what you think is cool, I mean, like, it could be the actual visual of it. I mean, I'm sure there's an episode of Boba Fett, Book of Boba Fett, where they have a ring world in it. Where did that get inspired by? Right?
Yeah.
Um, it was retooled, and I like how they did it, because it was kind of like, this ring city planet refueling station kind of thing. It was really cool, and that's where like the Mandalorians were at, that were there. So you can retool something visual, or you can retool like the pacing of something. Um, and I think that's what we talked about with Vader, is like his pacing, that presence is always there, but you could have another character, I think what we said, kill someone at the board meeting or whatever, or kill someone in an interrogation, especially like that's the first thing you see Vader do, is kill a rebel soldier, and throw him off to the side like he's nothing, like he weighs nothing. You're like, what is this presence? And then imagine if the Rogue One version of Vader was the first Vader that you ever saw. You're just like, this dude just came out of nowhere and slaughtered everybody. That is a scary person. And that's the presence you want. You don't have to need Vader. And that's what I actually, one of the Dragonborn in y'all's most recent D&D sessions, it was kind of based off of Vader, and actually like really thinking about Vader and thinking about kind of like what made him like this character of intense evil, and how can I bring that in to where it feels also like a complex character. And he does have some complex things. And he came in with a boom. And he killed one of the player characters.
TPK.
Yeah, it ended up being a TPK, and that was like, that was the presence I was trying to bring to this character, and I guess I did.
Yeah, I think like that dragon from the D&D movie, I think it's just the funniest thing, because just this big fat dragon, and I like the idea. I love juxtapositions in stories, and just the presence of opposites. Like you see that dragon and you're like, all right, this pudgy thing, like it's a lovable little dragon. As long as you don't get close enough for it to breathe fire on you, you're good. And then you see it like shoot down the hill, and it's like, it's just destroying everything. Yeah. It's so big. And it's like, oh wow, like that's actually terrifying. It's lovable and it's terrifying.
Yep. Yeah, 100%.
And I love that. So like that's the stripped down element. And we've talked about the 4 pillars periodically on the podcast, and it's like being able to observe something to that degree to where you can take it down to its elements. Like you just need to get into the process of observing things in a way that strips them down to what you need or what you could use. You don't want to do that the first time you see a movie, because that just makes you a stick in the mud. But
yeah,
but you definitely, in terms of art, you definitely want to be able to look at something and internalize it, dress it down, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think that covers our question section, which I think, I think that was cool. I really like this process. I really like reusing other people's stuff because, especially when it's going to be a smaller work that I'm not trying to get published or something, because it
Yeah.
really inspires me and keeps me moving.
Mhm.
And it forces me. I mean, like anybody who draws or paints understands, like if you try to emulate somebody else's style, suddenly it's forcing you to move the paint around in a way you never have before, or draw lines you never would have before,
Mhm.
and it accentuates different parts of the process that maybe you've ignored because it's just really not your flair, and it can really enrich your works, which I think is dope.
Yeah.
Um, so without further ado, we should jump into what's been inspiring us. And when we get back from our inspiration, which hopefully gives you something to watch or get into when you're not with us, which you should always be with us
Yes.
Mondays, um, every Monday. And anyway, when we get back from that, we're going to talk about um, some works that we're actually in the process of creating so that we can give you a little bit more context. I feel like myself specifically, I tend to get pretty off in space. And Michael, you do a good job of grounding me, but I feel like if we get talking about things that we're actually in the process of creating, it's going to be really helpful. So we're going to jump into that as soon as we get back from what's inspiring us. So, Michael, what's been inspiring you?
um, I have actually been inspired by, I think, like I said it earlier in our earlier in the recording, that gods and titans have been more of a thing in my world. And as far as like titans in my world, they're like elemental titans. But I wanted to do a little research on that, and man, there's a lot of lore in like the D&D world. I think it's called like Forgotten Realms or whatever. There's a lot of lore there. I actually have like 3 or 4 web pages that I've just been going through and just reading and reading and reading and trying to use those to inspire um what is going to be coming next for the sessions, and inspiring like abilities, because like these are going to be creatures that you guys are going to fight, and what do they do? How do they interact with the world? Like this is going to be the main big bad that just kind of came out in one of the last sessions. I don't have a stat block for it. I don't have anything. So like I'm going to have to create it all from scratch. And um, I'm kind of using all this lore as like a um as some type of direction on like where I need to go when it comes to actually building that out for D&D, and trying to like making a stat block to it, but also making it more than a stat block. I know one of the podcasts that we're going to do this month, or we're hoping to do, is adding like complexity to your world. And by doing all this research, I want to add some complexity to these characters, to these monsters, so they're not just a stat block that you guys got to kill. Like there's going to be some type of like dynamic environmental thing that needs to happen as well. So that's kind of what I've been inspired by recently. Like I said, I've got maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 web pages up just on looking up like for the next couple sessions. And then in that, I've also been watching some anime, and I've been watching Demon Slayer as it's coming out, and it continues to impress me, and continues to like I want to rewatch it and use some of those story points into like a future world, as far as like the demon elements of it. I think it's very interesting. So those are kind of been the 2 things that have been inspiring me recently.
Well, I went to well, first of all, I knew you were watching that. I got the notification the other day. It's like the new season's out. It's like Michael's watching that. I know it.
Yeah, yeah,
But,
100%.
I need to start over from season 1. It's been so long since anyway,
Yeah.
I uh I just went to the drive-in movie theater that we have out here, Stars and Stripes.
Mhm.
And anyway, it's so much fun, and it's like you can bring your own chairs and food, and you just like park the car. We sit in the back of the truck with some foldable chairs, and like, throw a blanket over, and they do double features on the weekends. So I
Oh,
saw Renfield and John Wick 4 back to back.
oh yeah.
And it was such a fun night anyway. But it was like Renfield is such a just beautifully done movie where it's like they basically sink a really heavy plot or a really heavy idea, which is like, don't let gaslighty people into your life, right? Without giving too much away.
Yeah.
Into this just ridiculously silly movie that's just so much fun to watch. It's like such a joy to just be a part of, even though it's not realistic at all. It's not
Yeah.
like grounded in anything. I think somebody gets killed in a room full of people just gruesomely and
Mhm.
nobody even reacts. This is like, it's just happening. Right.
Yeah.
And, so anyway, it's just like ridiculous, off the wall, guts flying everywhere, funny,
Mhm.
witty movie, and it talks about this really heavy subject, and that's something I really love. Is almost like you're blindsiding people with the a really emotional and deep element. I think is super cool, because a lot of people, if they know the emotional beats are coming, sort of like Everything Everywhere All at Once, that movie is amazing. It's like a strobe light of stuff, and then at the end you realize that there's this really heavy undertone of like this tough story to contend with. This sort of like blindsides you, but you've been listening to it the whole time. It's like, I don't know, if you knew it was coming, you wouldn't participate, but because you didn't, it's like, here you are, and here's some tissues. Right. And then John Wick 4 was just a beautiful movie. I mean, it was, the sets were beautiful, the design of the lighting and the clothes, and it's like everything was on color, everything was in the world,
Mhm.
and it was beautiful. Every inch of that movie was just stunning. And so, I mean, if you just are a fan of a lot of different kinds of art, John Wick 4 is beautiful. And especially, like, I mean, a lot of the there's some more kung fu elements in it too, which is, I mean, just like the fighting art alone is beautiful. And then the, locations, like I said, everything in this movie is just absolutely gorgeous, and the way they wrote it. And, so it was just, it added a lot to the John Wick world.
Yeah.
But even if you don't like that world, I think that it's a movie worth watching just to stare at. It
Yeah.
was so nice.
That's awesome. That's exciting. That's one of the movies I've wanted to watch, but I just haven't had the time to go and like watch it.
Yeah, no, tell me about it. You're burning the midnight oil, dude. I mean,
Oh,
it's
for real.
all the time.
Mhm.
You got to be at least 50, 60 hours a week by now, right? I mean,
Yeah,
and then
it's a lot.
with personal projects, that gets you up to 80 real quick. So,
Oh, for sure. For sure.
um, anyway, that's what's inspiring us. Love to hear from you guys. Our Instagram has been growing. I think we're 40 people now, I think, over there, and our YouTube's growing. So check us out, either of those places. You know what it is by now, right? CRTV, THNKR. Check us out. Send us a message. We love hearing from you and hearing what inspires you. So please do that. But let's move on to reusing your own work, and also um, works we're currently working on to
Yeah.
retool other people's work. Let's jump into that. What you got cooking, Michael?
So I think on our Friday brews with the boys, threw down a challenge to both Henry and I to start actually writing and getting this writing process done. Kind of practice what we preach. And so I'm still in the outlining process right now, but I kind of wanted to talk about some of the things that I'm repurposing for this world. And now that I say it, I don't have it pulled up yet.
Oh, what? I'm
Uh,
stalled out in the outline process, because I basically what I've done since college is, like, if I'm writing a script at the moment. I've been in the process of that for longer than I'd like to admit, but it anytime I've written an outline, basically I'll start a new scene. It's like interior, whatever room, day or night, right? And then under that, in the action lines, I'll add, okay, this is what needs to happen in this scene. So I've got a very easy way to sort of like, if I get stalled out in a scene, I can just scroll down and start typing into a new one. It's very free flowy. It's very easy. Um, but it's also like when you're outlining, it doesn't make a lot of sense. For me, I'm really spacey. So like, if I don't have clear structure, I'm just going to float away.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of what's happening. It's like I've got a very clear idea of what the arc should be for about the first act and a half of this it's a pilot episode of a show I'm trying to pitch. And anyway, so for the first act and a half, I've got a very clear idea, and then it sort of drifts away. And so I feel like I need a better structure of what my outline looks like so I can jump in. So thankfully, we've actually got an outlining episode coming up, which forces us to research and come to terms with what we're working on, and build the foundations in, and help you guys in the process. Very real world as we go kind of energy here on the podcast right now as we start working, which is what we were hoping for, I think. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm really excited for the outline podcast, because there's just so much detail that goes into it that I wouldn't have thought about. I would have just started writing. When I threw it down, I was like, let's just start writing and then we'll see what happens and what comes of it. But I actually took an idea from you for my current writing, and you were like, if you're having trouble like coming up with the story, just spend an hour or two just focusing on a different story, and then whatever really comes to you with like inspiration and what you're passionate about, go that direction. So I did that, and I had 4 different topics. One was like a Mandalorian topic. Actually, I have them pulled up right here. A Mandalorian topic. One I just titled Forest Town, because I was like, I want something low magic, but kind of like in a fantasy realm. One was titled like The Thieves, because I had an idea in my brain of like some of these thieves stole something and they didn't realize how valuable it was. And it's very loosely kind of along the lines of like Honor Among Thieves, where it's like they got set up, but going a different direction. And then just a short story about what's going on in the current D&D setting that we're playing in. So as all these elemental titans are coming out of the woodworks, what is someone else's perspective on that? And so I was excited to get into that one. And I thought that was going to be the one that I would actually lean towards the most, but I ended up going into like this forest town because it was just completely different. And that's what I've been really leaning on, is just making a completely different world than the one I'm currently using, just so I can have a clean slate of all kind of like new ideas, but all repurposed or just fresh, something completely fresh, a different world. Because I've actually run like 3 or 4 like short campaigns in our D&D world that we're in, just in different areas of the continent. So then
it's a very like wushu concept, right? Of like empty your cup. Otherwise you can't put anything new in it, right? It's like just wipe clean slate.
Yeah.
And that's what's cool about that exercise, is like what you, I wrote a story forever ago that was like, when I first did that exercise of like different story every day, where the first 5 stories, it was all about someone who is by themselves about to undertake this big mission, right? And so basically I ended up at almost like this spy novel kind of deal where it's like guy gets excommunicated from his government and is on the run now. But it's because they want to destroy the world and now he's on a path to save it. Very sort of Jack Ryan, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, it's like I would never have chosen to write that if I hadn't done that exercise.
Right. Yeah. And honestly, so, going back to repurposing, is the idea that I had was like, I want this low magic setting. I kind of just loosely had an idea of like, I want a small town, like something where everybody knows everybody. And they've known everyone, like it's a couple maybe generations. And I started talking to Molly about it, and I kind of just made this small little village. I was like, okay, so why is this small little village here? And what is going to be the catalyst of the story going forward? And so I follow a lot of D&D content, a lot of homebrew content, because I feel like D&D doesn't put out the best content, like the actual Wizards of the Coast. I actually feel like the third party groups are the ones making like really dope content, because they don't have to worry so much about balance. It can kind of be balanced, but it also gives you really cool stuff. Anyways, I saw someone put a barbarian path, and it's called the Path of the Hellraiser, and it has this really dope art. And I can't remember where I got it from, but Path of the Hellraiser. If you're interested, look it up. It's a barbarian path. It just really talks about this barbarian like using not just their rage, but like there's insatiable fire of just wanting to see like destruction happen. So I was like, villain for sure. Like that's the villain. Even though it's a path for a player character to play. And I kind of like wrote down the description of the class. I was like, okay, these are some of the things that it would do in the story. And so this is going to be what happens here. So that was my inspiration, and how I'm going to repurpose it is it's going to be this group of barbarian dragonborn coming into this city, and the area I'm in, I'm creating it. It's a fantasy setting, but it's going to be mainly humans here for right now. And then these dragonborn come in, and they're going to be the bad guys. And I typically play dragonborn as like good guys because I like them. They're dope. So now I'm kind of just pushing and forcing myself to think of something different. And so I'm using and repurposing that class as a whole entire villain for my story that I'm going to be creating. And then second, how I'm going to repurpose the beginning of it is there is a movie, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's the newest Predator movie. It came out on like Hulu or whatever. And I really like the advertisement for it, because until a certain point, I didn't realize it was a Predator movie. And I enjoyed that, because I feel like movie previews give a little bit too much away now. But I enjoyed that, not knowing about it. And I think the premise of that movie is like this girl is trying to like prove herself, and then gets attacked by the Predator, and then starts like running away. And so I'm going to kind of like loosely take that kind of aspect and bring it into my world, as far as the main character is going to survive this attack that happens on the village, and he's going to have to survive through the forest, survive being hunted for the first arc. And so those are the repurposing, the repurposing that I'm doing for my world.
The repurposes.
Yeah, the repurposing. So that's what I am repurposing for my world right now. And then, of course, like I said, I'm doing it in a fantasy setting, so there are always going to be some type of repurposing, but also trying to create like the originality of it, of my own story and my own world, and how I'm going to start creating different areas and the geography of it. Like I only have like a narrow window if we're looking like at the map. Like I only have this much of the map planned out, but I know the world's a lot bigger.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. I think that's a helpful. That was helpful. I mean, just hearing how I don't know, just the act of using, say, the opposite for Dragonborn, saying like, if you have a character trope in mind, if you have a character idea in mind, using them as the opposite, just at least, however you're gonna use that work. It's like, it forces you out of whatever ruts you're in. And I think that's cool. And it's like, that's the whole idea of this entire piece that you're working on. And I think that's going to be, really fun. I'm excited just hearing about it. So I imagine that's going to be really fun to execute. So I'm looking forward to all the outlining and stuff that we get to do here pretty soon.
Oh yeah. I'm excited to bring that forward to some other people, so that they can give me some feedback, and I can start making the world a little bit more. But I'm still kind of, like I said, I'm still in that outline phase, and that's what I have so far.
Yeah, that's cool for me. Go ahead.
Another thing I'm repurposing for the world, it's going back to our sci-fi episode, and there was something that we said that I thought was like, oh, this is perfect for this village, is when visitors come in, they hold a feast. So that's going to be the beginning of the story. Is there is an unexpected visitor, there needs to be a feast, and they go out and hunt, and that's kind of like the beginning of the story of the day-to-day life that happens. So I wanted to give a shout out to us, because I'm repurposing our own inspiration and bringing it into the story in a different way.
And that was Cruising Ships. If you want to listen to the
Yeah.
world building Cruising Ships sci-fi episode, that was dope. No, that sounds fun. I can't wait to look at that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm terrible at transitions right now. Here, Under Eve is a story I wrote years ago, and that's what I'm working on right now. Is basically Underworld had come out, and there was another movie that I can't think of what it was. So the idea of lichens and werewolves, right? The idea of werewolves was part of Underworld, and also the title of the movie, and thinking about like organized crime. And I was like, okay. So I wrote this story about, sort of like young guy with an attitude, very sarcastic, very like a first person inner monologue short story. And it was for a contest. I can't remember which one it was, but so I sent it off when it was done. But basically, I liked the idea of this Under Eve being a yearly celebration of the criminal world. Mm-hmm. And instead of New Year's Eve, it's Under Eve. And it just means that they have one more year where they're not in the gulags of this sort of sci-fi world. And I mentioned werewolves because the police, or the sort of elite police that were after him because he'd committed this heist, were basically like wolves, but like wolf robots. That were after him, and it all took place in this like futuristic but junky kind of world.
Yeah,
and it was the only planet there, and they had kind of the bougie government that was like, that's where all the money was, and that's why everybody else was suffering. Mm-hmm. So it had all those ideas, and it's been years since I wrote that. I think sometime last year I was reminded of it again. And just watching another sci-fi movie that I think it was Upside Down, which is like a sci-fi romance movie, and pretty good. Check it out. Two people are on opposite worlds. They fall in love, and this guy has to keep like weights from the opposite world in his pockets to keep him on the ground there, because gravity doesn't, like, you follow the gravity of the planet you're from, basically. Mm-hmm. But something about them degenerates, and so like he has a certain amount of time before it like burns him up. He's got to go back to his planet. Anyway, that's the plot of the movie. But it made me start thinking about what's the bigger world that is Under Eve, and what's the bigger, and that's one of the, we did a brainstorming session for a couple hours, and then we wrote that like 30-page backstory thing. Mm-hmm. And it just sort of exploded, but it all started from a short story I wrote, and then I just took the elements forward that I liked. Like there's not mag boots, but like jet boots or something. Yeah. Like that's a big part of the short story that I was like, this is just kind of like a cool thing, like flying boots, but really only for the planets that have like big warehouses and stuff, like the movers and shakers, right? The people who got a lot of ground to cover are really the only people who use them because they're not very practical, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, like that's where I got started. And then now we have this whole like system of planets, which is like, it's a much bigger story than what I gave it at the time. And I wasn't sure how or why. And then it was like through our conversation, we were able to pull out the elements of like, it's an interstellar, not interstellar, but interplanetary gang of people that are sort of like, as they steal money and as they're on the run, sort of like a Bonnie and Clyde kind of character. It's like they're unraveling the fabric of society, the quote unquote rules that are governing the world. So you have this same sort of proletariat, I think is what it was called. Anyway, that the upper echelon people that are so rich that they've almost achieved like this godlike status in the society, that are on the best planet, that are, that those people have purveyed this lie about, how good life is for everyone in the planet string, because they get to live like gods all the time. So of course they're happy and everybody else is sort of falling apart, and that's okay. But everybody agrees with that because they've bought into this lie, this societal presentation. And so this gang is going to come through, like burning down the universe for fame, money, and whatever else. That they're going to be burning through the solar system and taking with it this lie that says that we're all sort of equal in the system, and allowing people to dream once again, essentially, and allowing people the idea that they can be more than they are. And so that is the underlying elements that I think are still true from the early story that I'm bringing forward. But I've gone much heavier into sci-fi. I've gone much heavier into things that I know about a little bit more political drama, which is things that I've had to research quite a bit by like watching political dramas on TV, by reading political drama books, and getting into a different forms of sci-fi. So there's like subgenres and stuff. There's like political dramas, there's space operas, there's, technology fantasies, basically, where it's like super heavy into, this wire goes here because this, and this, and it's like engineering kind of stuff. And it's like, there's all these different genres. And as I've gone through them, I'm sort of like fleshing out the world. So, trying to take a little piece here, a little piece there, but also keep the idea that we're all connected to our families to some degree, and like that generational element you were talking about. So like I'm trying to, right now as I'm outlining, make sure I include the generational element in the story. Anyway, that's where I'm at. That's what I'm working on. Kind of pulling forward that story. If I get to where I am unembarrassed enough of that original, like what I submitted, I'll probably post that somewhere people can find it.
Yeah. How old were you when you wrote it?
I think this was like 8 years ago now. So
okay.
Yeah, I wrote it when I was, I think, 26, between 24 and 26. So like 8 years ago, something like that. It was pretty fleshed out. I think it was a good story. I think it just was trying to go too many places at once, and I couldn't get it condensed down enough to be a good short story. So short stories, I mean, you got to hit hard with simple ideas, and not cloud it with anything, which is really hard to do. And I just couldn't get it down to a simple idea. And so that's what kind of pushed me to like, I really like this story, but I can't make it simple. So let me make it as complicated as I want to. And then I can find the story in that complication. Right. Which I'm finding that combat is going to be a bigger part of the story than I thought it was going to be, because it's almost like all of the entertainment in the solar system is about combat, and it's about, competition. It's not as much about sports. It's more about like, we're fighting, it's contention. And so since, you can't have like a small band of like Bonnie and Clyde style, people going around fighting thousands of cops all the time. Like the action has to come elsewhere, I feel like. And there can be drama, but I do want some of that, like just different styles of fighting from around the world, like Muay Thai on one planet and Muay Thai on one planet, and like Wushu on another planet, just like, different styles of fighting or grappling or whatever to be an element of the show. That's which they would probably cut out budgetarily, but I'm going to include it anyway. But yeah, so that's what I've been working on to pull forward and repurpose my own work. The last thing I wanted to really get into here is adding flair. So, we've talked about how to reduce things to their core elements. We talked about like taking things that we like versus things that we don't like, but we haven't really talked about adding your own flair, which we did a little bit with Tartarus. But I think, like renaming places, or like finding things in the context of your world is, I think, more what I'm trying to say with that, which is like, if we took maybe Darth Vader once again and dropped him into the Undereve world, the sci-fi world, more traditionally sci-fi. If you're thinking of like, the Expanse, because that's what I've been reading. I've been deep in the Expanse lore right now. If you drop Darth Vader into the Expanse, it would be really weird. It'd be really weird. And so to have that same character doing those same basic things, he's limited by the space he's in. Like, first of all, the Force is gone. So how does that change Darth Vader? Right. And, most people aren't wearing masks like that, even if they are disfigured. So how do we change him visually at that point? Because he's now in the context of your own world versus, his own world. So there's a lot of things that can change and happen when you just transplant someone into your space. And then once you have sort of removed what you need to remove, then you say, well, you have this disfigured guy. What am I adding to him to help him get around? What am I adding to him that makes sense to the Expanse world? It's like, they have more like robotic wheelchairs than they have like these good limbs that you can replace things with, or like you can grow some things back. You can, it's like once you start adding in your own world and saying, well, his partner betrayed him, but he's like at this corporate level, because Expanse is a big like corporate world, then corporate wars look different. It's like you have private armies, but do they really need private armies, or do they need to go to the place that other corporation was trading with and just get them to not do business with that person? Right. So is it more, it almost immediately becomes more a political thing, which is what the Expanse is about, is like a political interchange between these different planets. And so it almost immediately changes the character beyond recognition, just transplanting them into your world. So that's what I mean by flair adding fun, is like the more flair you add, the more you submerge this character in your world, the more fun it's going to be and the more it's going to be yours.
Typically what I'll do is like I'll repurpose them by just taking the like certain characteristics or certain traits and then adding them into my world. Like, how does that make sense for them to be here? And then I think we've talked about like when we're creating either like, I guess we're talking about villains because we're Vader, but sometimes I'll go into like, I'll try and go to sleep in the head of a character to like help flush out the world. So even though they have these characteristics, I want them to stick true to it and then see how people react to it, because there are people like that. I repurpose NPCs by people I've worked with, by the personality traits or like the weird quirk that they have. I think there was like a shop owner. There was someone I worked with before that he would just always like put his head over like this, and he would talk and he would like rub his head. I was like, dude, stop it. You're in charge. But it was just like a weird quirk that he did. And so like I take those weird quirks and then incorporate them into the personality, the character, and kind of like mix and mash them into a character that's my own now. Even though they have the presence was Vader, they also have this weird quirk, and then they do this and then they do that. And now it's not really Vader, it's my own person now.
Yeah.
That's kind of my thought process whenever I see a character that I really like and I'm like, ooh, I want to add them into my world,
Yeah. And that's a good point too. I think like mashups are a great way to eliminate anything recognizable. So like, if you wanted to make a good character that was really powerful and you liked Darth Vader and you liked Pikachu, you know what I mean? Like you can just mash those two characters together and then come up with a look you like just go find your favorite actor and see a movie that they were in and say, okay, now it looks like them,
Yeah, exactly.
And mashing up, the more ideas you mash up, the less recognizable it is.
100%.
And there is still validity in being the person that has the vision to mash those things up and being the person that then creates this new thing. There is value, even though your repurposing works, even though you're pulling from different places, there's still just as much value in the artistry that comes with it. At the end of the day, we've been talking about writing because that's what we're both submerged in right now. At the end of the day, you still have to write a compelling story, and you still have to put pen to paper and put all your elements and ducks in a row, so to speak. And so there will never be a time when to make what is a completed good piece of art, you didn't have to be a good artist along the way. And so I think that that's like the most important takeaway from today.
Mhm.
Because there's so much, I guess, shame around like, well, I don't have an original enough idea. Well, just get an idea and start.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's better than sitting around chastising yourself for not being able to create, what is one of the best fictional characters ever. And, Darth Vader is one of the most prolific for sure. So you can't really
Yeah.
argue with that.
Hmm.
And one of the most international, right? So,
Yeah.
you can't chastise yourself for not being that person. Like of 7 billion, one person was that person. One.
Yeah.
So be one of the other 6.9 billion and repurpose somebody else's work and make it
Hmm.
into something unique.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you, creatives all around the globe. Make sure you check us out on YouTube. Make sure you check us out on Spotify, because that helps us with being able to run commercials and stuff like that. As if we have enough people check us out on Spotify, they host the platform. Check us out over there. Check us out on Instagram. Creative Thinker, CRTV, THNKR. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.